Jesus more.
So my dear friends, a little clarification before I dive into the gospel of today about the figure of Mary Magdalene. You know, many people have always thought that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute, that Mary Magdalene was the woman in John who was caught in adultery. So people always think of Mary Magdalene, of somebody who was promiscuous, he was evil and all that. But that is not biblical at all. Okay? That Mary Magdalene was a prostitute is not biblical, it's not written anywhere in the scriptures. Maybe because of the movies we find on YouTube and on other media platforms makes us feel that Mary was a prostitute, but it is not biblical and it is not proven. So the only thing that we hear about Mary in the gospel is during the resurrection, but we also hear of the woman from which 7 demons were cast out. It's all. Nothing about prostitution or anything. So those are things that have been created, maybe in trying to make a movie, to make it look more real and to try to put the past together. And at times we feel that is what Mary was. No, Mary was not a prostitute. It's not written anywhere in the scriptures that she was a prostitute. There's a woman in John's Gospel, chapter 8, who was caught in adultery, but it is not mentioned that it was Mary Magdalene. So just to keep that in mind. So the only thing we know about Mary is that she is the one from which 7 demons were cast out. And this is what we hear today in the Gospel. That Jesus cured them from infirmities, but also from casting out demons from them. One of them, Mary Magdalene. Then we don't know whether Joanna and Susanna also had that. But he said the women from which some women who had been cured of evil spirits. So possibly maybe Joanna as well as Susanna are some of them who had demons in them and they were cast out. Then this company, this group of women who came from Galilee, again mentioned at the end of Luke's Gospel. Where is that? At the crucifixion. They followed Jesus not only during this time, contributing to them from their own resources, but they were there at the crucifixion. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 23 and verse 49, you find that they are there at the crucifixion. And in other Gospels as well, you would find them. That they were there at the crucifixion scene. You find them in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 27, Mark's Gospel, chapter 15, John's Gospel, chapter 19. You find these women at the foot of the cross. Some Gospels will say they were standing at a distance and they washed. The other time that you find them in Luke's Gospel, because we are reading from Luke's Gospel, is at the resurrection. They were those who were given that message, who first witnessed the resurrection scene. In Luke's Gospel, chapter 24, verse 10, we hear about that they had gone in the morning of the resurrection to anoint Jesus, and then they found 2 angels, and he gave the news to them that Jesus was risen. So they were the first witnesses of the resurrection. They are the ones who carried the news of the resurrection to the people. And you know what? Women in the time of Jesus would not be considered as witnesses for anything. I mean, if you wanted your story to be incredible, then use women. Women were not regarded as anything. And if you want to know about that, you can read John's Gospel, chapter 4, of Jesus' encounter with the woman at the well. That when the disciples came, verse 27, we hear, they were asking him, what are you doing with that woman? What are you talking with that woman? So women were not allowed to talk with men in the open. And that's why the disciples of Jesus were asking Jesus why he was talking with the woman at the well. So how would Luke, if he wanted to just convince people about Jesus, how will he use women as witnesses of the resurrection? Why will he put women as the disciples of Jesus like we hear today? So that makes it even more credible that Luke was writing what he witnessed, what was true. It's not just something that is formed to convince people about Jesus. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used women. But centralizing on what we have read today, their story started with being possessed. So from dispossession, they were dispossessed by Jesus, and then they became the disciples of Jesus. From becoming disciples of Jesus, they became witnesses of Jesus, became witnesses of his death and his resurrection. Imagine these very women who were possessed stood by Jesus right to the very end, something that the 12 men could not do. John did it. John only, the beloved disciple, went with Jesus up to the time of his death. But the others left. These women were there till the very end. If the Gospels were just to convince us about some truth, or to write and convince people about the existence of Jesus, they wouldn't have used these women as witnesses. But then we see their journey from being people of evil who were possessed by demons, which we ourselves experience in our lives as Christians. In fact, the journey of these women is very symbolic of our own journey as Christians. But there are moments that we are dispossessed as well. Because we are all possessed, if you like it or not. Somewhere or another we are possessed. Okay? We are possessed through the demons of addictions. We go on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook all the time. These things are possessions. We call it in a very nice way, I am just addicted to this. But an addiction has its own demon that is associated with it. So somehow we need Jesus to dispossess us of everything that is evil. But from dispossession, he wants to make us his disciples, because once he dispossesses us, then he wants to possess us with his Spirit that leads us, that guides us, that makes us his followers. Then we become followers of Jesus, following his ways, not just following somebody on Facebook or following somebody on TikTok or following somebody on YouTube, but following Jesus, who is the way, the truth, and the life. This is what these women did. They were dispossessed, and the moments they were possessed, they were filled with the Spirit of God, and they became disciples of Jesus. They were ready to contribute to the welfare and the ministry of Jesus from their own savings. And thirdly, they were given the grace to become witnesses, became witnesses of Jesus, especially witnesses of his death and resurrection. And my dear friends, this is exactly what we celebrate at Mass. Okay? That during Mass, during the time of the Confiteor, just before the readings, we hear the prayer of absolution, trying to bring us closer to Jesus, forgiving us from all our sins. And then we have the moment of discipleship, which we hear from the Gospels and the readings. Once the readings are read, it is a way of bringing us into a relationship with Jesus, making us disciples of Jesus by our ways and our actions. And this is what we do during the Mass. And then the prayer of deliverance also we hear after the Our Father, deliver us from all evil. Okay? This is the prayer of deliverance that these women possibly might have undergone as well. That we also undergo that every time at Mass. And then at the end of Mass, we are also sent out as witnesses. When the priest says, go in the peace of Christ, the Mass is ended. Go and glorify the Lord with your lives. So we must become witnesses of Christ. Forgiven from all our sins, become disciples, but we also become witnesses of Christ wherever we are, in our families, in our homes, in our places of work. And through that, we truly become the disciples and followers of Christ. We therefore ask God in his love and in his mercy that we may respond to his call to discipleship and to be his witnesses to the ends of the earth.
Kiss us, mother, kiss your children. Bring God's blessings from above. With your mantle blue enfold us in your gentle holy love. See the darkness dissipating, hear the trumpet echoing. Satan's rage